So it's interesting to see how often conversations on issues get derailed from the realm of reason into the realm of emotion with phrases like, um, what about the children, right? Which is usually said in some kind of a shrieking tone. Um, so it's really a shame to see these things because people tend to really struggle with thinking in terms of second or third order consequences. And often, what is actually good for the children or the old people or the poor people or whatever seemingly vulnerable group of people we might be using to persuade people to our way of thinking, what's best for them usually isn't what's best immediately and obviously, because reality is complicated and those second and third order consequences can eat your lunch. So it's funny for me to make this video because what I'm going to tell you is think about the children. So I want to throw down a challenge for any men who might be watching this. Whether you're a father or you maybe someday, or, it's interesting. I don't want to get too derailed on this idea, but of all the family relationships, one that you can most readily emulate outside of actual family relationships is father-son. So any two men can have this relationship, and it doesn't matter what their physical relation is or even their age. Almost everything, if not everything, that can be shared between an actual father and a son, minus DNA, can be shared by any two men. And there's some deep lessons, deep impact implications, and gospel lessons in that. Really important ones, in fact, but we'll save that for another day. Point is, this advice applies to all men. That's the short story. So my challenge is act at all times as you would want your children to act in your place. So this is interesting because it's very powerful too. It's good advice to always think about what the Lord would do in your place. But I think one limitation of that approach, if there are any, is that I think that we might find ourselves saying, well, I don't really care about myself that much. I think that's kind of a weenie excuse because it's not about you, it's about how much you love the Lord. But in the event that this might provide a support for someone, let's go with it, right? So let's say that for some reason you're struggling to do excellent things and be an excellent person because you just don't care that much about yourself. You're happy, as many men are, you go into a bachelor pad and there's just sort of milk crates and it smells bad and whatever, and there's tons of dishes in the sink. Or maybe they don't even have dishes. You just, you're using that paper plate for the 20th time. Because men are just okay with that, right? And you could extend this to character traits and extensions into life. But when kids come along, the picture changes. Now all of a sudden it's not just about you. Of course, there's a lady involved, but we're focusing on kids right now. So you want the best for these kids. And I think a lot of people find it easier to care about kids than they do to care about themselves. Maybe I'm wrong about that, I don't know. But I have found that a powerful motivator for doing the best that I can think of in my life is to always remember that there will come a time and a place where my sons can look at my example and say, well, this is really hard. It's way harder than I ever thought it could be. But we know Dad went through this, and this is how he acted. So we know it can be done. Or, what would Dad do? And not just sons. I've told stories before about my grandfather. But my mom told me just the other day, she said, she's getting up there in years, as we all do. But she said, it's funny, I find myself more than ever thinking, what would Dad do? When something's really tough to figure out, I think, what would Dad do? It's a real shame that more people, more kids don't have the opportunity to say that, because they don't want to turn out like their dads. All this applies to moms too, I guess. So it's a tremendous gift to be given inexpressible opportunity to help another person in such a powerful way. I don't know what can compare to this, because you're around these kids all the time, and you violently thrash between too much and too little. It's like, oh my gosh, they're driving me nuts. I just wish that they could be quiet for 5 seconds. Or, holy cow, they're growing up so fast. And I wish I had 5 more seconds. But because you spend so much time around them, they know exactly who you are. They know who you are better than any stranger would. And so at all times, you're either giving them this treasure of making life easier and better than it would be if you weren't around, or you're making their lives harder than they need to be. Now, it's important to understand that while they're around you so much, and they see so much, a lot more than most people would want them to see. And you should live your life so that you want them to see everything. And we got to remember, this is a much larger idea, but we're approaching the time when all things will be known. And you really should live your life that way, in all ways. Anyway, as much as they see, you need to understand that the stuff that they don't see also affects them, because it affects you. All things are connected to all things. In so many ways, we don't see the connections, but they are there. I promise you. And so you have to do everything the best way you know. at all times and in all places if you want to give the greatest good to your kids. Because it all matters. And there's a scripture that says something like, it's the Lord speaking. He says, basically, sometimes a person will be willing to die for another person if that person's good. And I know a lot of parents who would die for their kids if some situation arose where someone had to die because they're going to get shot or, I don't know, run out of food, whatever. The parent would say, I'll go, because they love their kids that much. If you love your kids that much, you should also live for them. And if you're willing to die in terms of life, you should be willing to die in terms of the flesh. And let go of all those limitations and those, I'm too tired, I just need a moment for me, I just, I want to look at this thing or do this thing or not do this thing or whatever. Just let it go. And just think about your kids. Because the good you can do for them, it vastly exceeds what we think about in a normal way. Because it's all connected. Their brains are recording what they see and what they experience all the time. But it's also the things they don't see, it still comes through. And arguably, it might come through to a much greater extent. Those hidden things, those deep things of the heart, they're there. And we're all building a legacy for our kids. Jesus told us to care after the least of these. And he said to love your neighbor. Well, who's least? I mean, kids, they have no self-operation. They can't care for themselves when they first come. And that builds slowly, but the impact you can have on your kids, it's just so immense. And not really the central purpose of the video today, but we got to take active roles in the lives of our kids. There's so much good we can do by spending more time with them and by orienting that time in terms of what can I do for the greatest benefit of this child? Not what can I do for the greatest immediate pleasure of this child? Everything's backwards today. Everything. But this is backwards too. What your child says they want here and now has nothing to do, usually, with what's going to give them eternal joy, let alone joy when they're 37 years old or 52. Focus on the greatest good. Help them. You got to have plans for your kids. Not that you're going to shunt them into the life that you would pick for them. They get to choose, right? But while they're under your wing, do everything you can to help them discern between the bitter and the sweet and to prepare. Kids don't have the natural ability to engage in long-term plans. That's on you. So like no kid is going to, well, it'd be super rare for a kid to want to learn piano, for example. That's a really simple idea. It takes a long time to get good at piano. And so you need to encourage them to do stuff like that and intentionally choose things. And maybe they're just placeholders for now. But for instance, learning piano, every kid that does that is going to learn, hey, I can do hard things if I just practice and put in the time. And I might be really, really stinky at something at the start, but I can become good at it. That's a wonderful lesson that translates into so many other things, right? A lot of people do what they can to engineer situations where their kids can care for animals. That's a wonderful thing. Very, very rich learning ground there. There's so many things they can pull out of that, like the need to focus on something else before yourself, because an animal will die if you don't care for it every day, and so on. There's a whole lot of stuff there. Depending on how you do it, lessons about life and death, and just getting that visceral connection to how things really are, instead of living in a condo somewhere where your feet never touch the grass. So you really have to engineer these experiences in your life, and don't outsource them to other people. Become the person who can do this the best, because they're your kids. And if you can't do it the best, at least do it intentionally. And maybe there's like a wise aunt or a wise uncle or wise grandpa or wise neighbor or something. Somebody that you can say like, oh, well, you want to be a veterinarian. Okay, well, that's not my cup of tea, but my cousin George is a veterinarian, or my neighbor Sally, or whatever. I don't think anyone's actually named Sally today. Actually, as I said that, I thought of one person I know. Anyway, so hopefully you get the point. I've tied into this video some ideas I was saving for another time, but I just can't stress how much, we're all here for a reason. And I think there are going to be some people who are dismayed, to put it in a completely inadequate way, that are dismayed when they come to find out how much of their mission in life was to set their kids on their shoulders as a starting point to achieve greater things. As long as you're not doing what you can do, not becoming what God has given you the power to become, your ability to help others is going to be vastly reduced. And your joy is going to be vastly reduced. Your purpose. You're not here to just go through the suburban motions and take your kids to the pool for swimming lessons or whatever all the time. Have your kids in public school and then shuttle them off to their after school, also outsourcing their time to other people, getting raised by their peers instead of better people who have already learned something about life and overcome something in life. So I hope that everyone takes this seriously, and if you've already gone down that road and your kids have left home, or now you're in the realm of grandkids or whatever the case may be, everything here still has an application. I mean, if you still have kids, you're still a dad. God desires to bless you in this endeavor. You turn to Him. He is the ideal Father. And it doesn't matter where we came from as far as examples we had or didn't have. And it doesn't matter where we come from in terms of the examples we've been or haven't been. Today is a new day. So turn the leaf and start seeking Him further in this and all things, and ask Him for guidance. Write down what He tells you and commit yourself. It doesn't matter how small the steps are. Move forward, because that's the direction He goes in. God bless you in this.